is both on natural selection as well as where did the races come from, okay? And what does the Bible tell us about those things? As I told you, we have lots of information that you can have in there. And of course, we also have our website, which is what again, guys? All right, so what does the Bible say about races? Well, you guys might know this fellow, okay? And he wrote a book not too many years, well, actually, over 150 years ago, that made a bigger impact on our world than any other book outside of the Bible. I know that's kind of a bold statement, but this book in particular popularized the idea of evolution and millions of years. This is the book that started it all, called On the Origin of Species, and it popularized biological evolution. But it also caused many in the church to start viewing the world and the world around them in two different realms, kind of science and religion. But I also want to point out the title, if you guys can read right here, okay? The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. But I want you to hear the next part. Or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Favored races. Interesting little hint. And he talks about this in his book. In fact, on Darwin's famous voyage on the Beagle, you know, he went to South America and he saw the Fuegians, those people that lived in that area. They lived primitively. And in fact, earlier, another version had taken a couple, a man and a woman, back to England and educated them. They put them in British dress. And then one of the things that Darwin and the Beagle and the crew were bringing back were these two people, and what they were going to do was civilize them, all right? Bring British civilization to the people. And his idea of races, and many people in that time were really done that. He believed that the non-white races, okay, were less evolved than the supposed white race that he happened to belong to. And he applied natural selection to human beings in this book as well as a subsequent book that he wrote 20 years later, okay? And when we made this documentary about Darwin, we actually went into that. And some of the interviews that we had, like for instance this professor, he said that the conviction of many Europeans was that the non-white races simply did not have the capacity to be elevated properly into civilized human beings, that they are mentally and morally at a more limited level. In a sense, they are stuck at an earlier stage in biological evolution of the human species. And I just want to let you know it was clearly stated in his book. But before we talk about where the races come from, I'm just going to give you the background of why this is an important thing. We need to first get an idea about what natural selection is, because this is a key point that's taught to students in science classes around the world. And they'll even say that natural selection is the main cause of evolution. In fact, that's true, but it's a major issue. In fact, creation scientists don't have any problem with natural selection. It's something that we can observe. In fact, it even supports the Bible, and I hope after we're done with this session you'll see. But I want you to note that it's not evolution. All right, so pay attention to some of the clues that we're going to be talking about, and you can figure out why it's true. Also, I want you to think about how you could use this to share with other people. That's really the purpose of these talks and our materials, is so that you will be ambassadors for the truth of God's Word. So natural selection, let's take a look at an example. You might notice that I like dogs, all right, because dogs give us a nice channel. But let's do a little experiment in a way. I guess technically it's not an experiment. But what I would like you to do is imagine. In fact, everybody close your eyes. Imagine a world with no dogs. That's sad. You've never seen a dog. You don't know what a dog looks like. They've never existed. Okay, now open your eyes. And let's say that paleontologists dug up the remains of these two creatures. What do you think they would conclude? And by the way, I can back this up because this kind of thing has happened. But what would they say about these two creatures? What would a paleontologist say? Different species, and that one evolved from the other. Okay? And it's interesting because a lot of times that's exactly what happens when we go and look at horses and different things. Oh, they're different. Well, they're horses. There's little horses, there's big horses, but they're all kind of the same kind. Same thing with these dogs. You know, they're both dogs. I mean, if you can call a Chihuahua a dog, I don't know. But so I just insulted some Chihuahua owners here probably, okay? But anyhow, they can even interbreed. I know that sounds crazy, but they can't. Actually, the mother controls birth size. So if it was a female Great Dane, it would be like this really big half Chihuahua, half Great Dane. It would be very interesting. But we need to figure out what determines the physical attributes that make dogs, or for that matter, any other kind of creature. And what determines the physical attributes is in something that is actually the most complex information storage system in the universe, and it's called deoxyribonucleic acid. And the reason that I say deoxyribonucleic acid really fast is because then you'll think that I'm really smart, okay? But anyhow, it is the DNA molecule. And you might remember from school that it's like a twisted ladder, sort of, and at the end of those rungs are something called nucleotide letters, okay? They're made up of about 25 atoms each, all right? And there are 4 letters in the alphabet, all right, in the nucleotide letter alphabet. And these letters make up words, which make up sentences, which make up paragraphs, chapters, and books, and then encyclopedia sets, okay? You know, those are called the genes and the chromosomes. And what's encoded in this information, all right, that's in the form of these letters is the characteristics that make creatures look the way they are, determine the way, whether, you know, what shape, size, color, and what kind of organs we have and those kind of things. It determines the characteristics. All right, now DNA is a pretty awesome, amazing storage system. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. If you were able to stack DNA nucleotide letters, those little molecules made up of about 25 or so atoms, and you were able to stack them on the head of a pin, okay, just pile them up on the top of a head of a pin, and that's the right term in South Africa, right, like a straight pin, okay. How many, if each one of those nucleotide letters represented a letter in a book, like this one, okay, if each one of those letters represented a letter in a book, all right, and you have enough stacked on the head of a tin, how many books do you think you'd be able to write with just that amount of DNA? Anybody want to take an estimate on what it might be? 1,000 what? Wow, that's specific. 1,820. Not. That's pretty interesting. Any raises on that? Anything more on that? Actually, let me tell you how many books you would be able to write. If you took the books and laid them flat and stacked them up, okay, the pile would go to the moon 500 times. If you put all that information on CDs, okay, the stack of CDs laid flat would be, I don't know, I'm sorry for the imperial thing, but it would be really tall, okay? Talking about a lot of information, and Bill Gates is very jealous, okay? But you see, the genes are stored here, and they determine physical characteristics of a creature. Now, some creatures have more and some have less. Now, bacteria, which is a fairly complex creature, has approximately 500,000 coded letters. All right? It's about the equivalent of 1 book's worth of information that gives you all the coded letters to make all the stuff that is in a one-celled creature like a bacteria. However, a horse has about 3 billion letters. It's almost 1,000 times more information. So you might say, 1 book worth of information gives us what they call a simple cell, and we're going to talk about that. It's not simple, not at all. And then about 1,000 books to make a horse, because see, a horse has things that a bacteria doesn't. It has a heart, circulatory system, fur, digestive system. It's much, much more complex. And just like if we were making a blueprint, right? If you're making a more complex building, it takes more information. Are you guys following with me? But here's the thing I want you to notice. According to evolution, the horse evolved from this. That means we need to evolve from one book worth of information, theoretically, to thousands of books. Does that make sense? We need to add information, all right? So, let's first take a look at the simple cell. There it is. That's the simple cell. And if we were able to look at it even closer, it would be pretty amazing. According to evolution, that in a warm pond full of non-living chemicals, the first amino acids, which are the building blocks of those nucleotide letters, formed just by chance. And that became the first protein, which is the building blocks of this cell. And then all those proteins just happened to get together and form this simple cell. And that all life descended from that. But there's no such thing as a simple cell. I just want to let you know. In fact, the simplest cell that we know of that's living is called a mycoplasma. It has 285,000 nucleotide letters, and it's very complex. In fact, the typical cell has been described not as simple, but as a machine, and even more complex than like that. In fact, it's like a city. It's got power plants, it's got factories, it's got energy, it's got highways, it's got temperature control systems, communication network, all manufactured to high precision out of raw materials. And it can reproduce itself in only 20 minutes. In fact, a simple cell is more complex than the city of New York. With all of its communication system and energy systems, it actually, if you enlarged it, it would be more complex than that. And aren't you glad that New York can't reproduce itself in 20 minutes? But that's the kind of thing. And the genes are stored in the nucleus, all right, in the DNA there. And that's what determines what creatures look like. So let's go back to our dog example. In fact, I think this is the part you're going to enjoy the most. We're going to talk about natural selection. Now, you guys remember when you studied biology that you get half of your genes from mom and half from dad. Do you remember that? All right. So we're going to use a simple yet accurate representation of this. So I've got two dogs here. And these two genes that came from their mom and dad represent fur length, how long the hair is, okay? The one on the left represents short hair, and this represents long hair. You with me? So these two dogs have medium length fur. Now, if they fall in love and have puppies, all right, then for fur length, they get one gene from mom and dad. So let's say they get the short hair gene from mom and the short hair from dad, all right? Then that puppy is going to have short hair. Does that make sense? I mean, this is simplified, but it's theoretically correct. Now, what are the other combinations that can happen? So we could have the long hair from mom and the short hair from dad and vice versa, right? So the chances are, this is, if you guys remember the Punnett square, if you're really sciencey, there are 4 different options. And what's the last option? That they get the long hair from both mom and dad, right? Okay. Now, we now have a new population. You guys see that? And there's some change that happened in the population, correct? Now let's move that population into Canada, all right? Because it's really cold up there. Now, as you can see, some of these creatures are going to be more likely to adapt to their environment and survive than the others. Which ones are going to live, most likely to live? Right, the long hair. So these guys are all going to die out, theoretically. I'm showing you natural selection so you get an idea. Now, we have an interesting change, don't we? Because if these guys fall in love and they have puppies, what could they have? What kind of puppies can they have now? Long hair. In fact, no matter how often they do it, that's all that's going to happen. Now, do you see the change, the natural selection that happened from those original kinds? Do you see that? Okay, that's natural selection. That's a good example. But did you see what else happened? Do you remember, in order for evolution to be true, we have to go from less information to more information? And I'm going to make a bold statement, but it's backed up by science, that in natural selection, there's always less information. Things specialize, all right? And they become more and more specific. There is change going on, but it's going the wrong direction that evolution requires, all right? So dogs do change, absolutely, into different kinds of dogs, just like the Bible has been telling us. And when a science professor is saying, hey, you know, I see evolution happening right here in the present, all right? They might talk about maybe a particular butterfly or moth that over time, as it adapts to its environment, has changed color or shape or size. Yet, what most people have in mind is something very different than that kind of change that can be demonstrated, that over millions and millions of years that things have changed drastically. But it's not a change from one kind to another. A lot of examples that are given to us. For example, when Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, he talked about these finches, and he talked about how they changed, all right? But what they changed into is different kinds of finches with different sized beaks. And in fact, the larger the beak was maybe on the drier side of the island where they could crack nuts, and then the smaller beak was when there was more rainfall. But nonetheless, it didn't increase but decreased information. In fact, it was cyclical. Depending upon the weather, they would change over and over there. He was only there for 5 weeks. But now that we've watched him, we see that the change happens over and over again, and they're still finches. Okay? Or peppered moths. I don't know if any of you guys were taught this in school, about the dark and light moths on the different kinds of trees. And of course, you know, the birds could pick off those that would contrast and everything. But nonetheless, they were still moths. All it did was change the population, but it didn't go in the direction. In fact, the secular scientist, he said, how did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows. And he went on to say there's no known law of physics able to create information from nothing. We don't get more information, we actually get less. And we need to go the other way. And that's exactly what's happening. No increase of information. And like I said before, the genetics support that they now know that those dogs from the Great Dane and the Chihuahua descended from a common kind. That's what genes say. But some of the things that are in the Chihuahua are not in that original wolf kind and in the Great Dane. They've specialized, not gotten better. But what were those original kinds? And we really don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. But we do have these modern varieties that give us a hint. You know, we have domestic sheep, different kinds, right? We have dairy cattle that are all different kinds, camel, tiger, zebra, and all descended from a particular kind. So these modern varieties, where they come, and there are some surprises that they're finding in science. At the Center for the Study of something called Baraminology, that's a big word that basically means what were the original kinds. It's in Dayton University in the United States. They're trying to figure out which animals were those original kinds. And the theory is that if they could breed together today, that would be an indication that they probably were. For example, this creature is the largest cat in the world. All right? It's called a liger. Okay? That's a male lion with a female tiger. Okay? Not only can it breed, but it can have fertile offspring. Kind of crazy thoughts. How about this? A comma. Camel and llama. Now, there's a restriction on how far they can go, you know? You wouldn't want to try that out, all right? But nonetheless, you know, there's variation within these different kinds. There's a dog kind, a rose kind, a frog kind, a fern kind, and a horse kind, which would include the zebra, okay? In fact, I'd like to introduce you to Gillis. That's the name of this zorse. That's not photoshopped, ladies and gentlemen. That's a real animal that looks exactly like that, okay? So that is a zorse. I don't need to tell you what that is, zebra and horse, all right? So that's what we're talking about here. So some of you are going, but wait, natural selection isn't the only thing. There's mutations. There's another mechanism that changes DNA, and indeed mutations do change DNA, but they're copying mistakes, okay? It's basically that as these cells reproduce, that sometimes things go wrong. In fact, it's really bad, because guess what? Everyone in this room has mutations. Did you guys know you're all mutants? I happen to know we all are, because we all have mutations. In fact, that's what causes disease and the problems that we have, the health problems. But if you were to copy a page of text and turn it into your professor and say it's a different assignment, all right, would you get more credit for it? I mean, because it's the same thing. But normally when letters are changed or removed, does it improve information or make it worse? You know, if you start changing letters in something that's written, it's always going to make it worse. In fact, it usually ruins it. So actually, mutations pretty much always cause more problems than not. And we even take breeding. Sometimes mutations happen in creatures, and people like dog breeders go ahead and will take advantage of these mutations because some people think that they're cute. I own what's called a puggle, all right, and his nose is smashed into his face, and he can't breathe very well. He's really cute, but my goodness, he's got a lot of problems that were caused by mutations, okay? Can't even believe people bred stuff like that. So I've now insulted Chihuahuas and bulldog owners all at the time. I really do like dogs. This is an interesting mutation of a chicken, all right, that is featherless. TNR stands for totally naked rooster, all right? It's not good for the chicken. It's only good for Colonel Sanders, all right? Makes it a little easier for him. But even, for instance, this is a quote from Carl Sagan. I don't know if you guys have heard about him before. He was a really major influential person on evolution. By the way, he's now a creationist. I don't know if you know that. Okay, some of you, he's dead. He's passed away, so now okay, anyhow, this is what he said. Mutations occur at random and are almost uniformly harmful. It's rare that a precision machine is improved by a random chance in the instructions for making it. And this scientist, Lee Spector, said that all point mutations that have been studied on a molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not increase it. Not even one mutation has been observed that adds a little information to the genome. This is a silver spike inside evolution. It can't survive unless you have more information. We have no mechanism. And I mean, if we take a frog, all right, and make them into a smoothie, all right, all the amino acids, all the proteins, and all the components of life are in that soup. But given millions of years, is a frog going to jump out of that? And yet, in this primordial soup that evolutionists tell us about, we don't even have anywhere close to this kind of information, just non-living chemicals, all right? Now, some of you might be thinking, yeah, but so many animals look together. I mean, obviously, you know, animals have evolved from each other, but no scientist I know would say that this reptile, fish, and mammal evolved from each other. They're in completely different classes. So the best explanation for these similarities isn't evolution, but it's a common designer. You know, these kind of things, you know, just like horses have circulatory systems like we do, that design is over and over and over and over and over again, right? Common designer, not evolution. You know, for example, if you took these two creatures, may I say, they both have four wheels, they have four-cylinder motors, they're horizontally opposed cylinders, they're air-cooled. They drive independent rear wheels. There's a trunk in the front, and why is all that? Why do they have the similarities? Same designer, Dr. Porsche, okay? Common designer. So, Romans 1:20 said, so that we may know that there is only one Creator God, and we are without excuse. That's what the design and the complexity in the world talks about. You know, a lot of people talk about, they look up at the stars and they go like, oh, look at God's creation. You know, I'd rather look in a microscope. You know, stars are actually pretty simple. They're very beautiful and everything, but they're compared to life, they're nothing. Look in a microscope and you can see the handiwork of God and the complexity of what he did. So evolution is the prevailing feeling, and one of the things that people point out is that, you know, we evolved from some ape-like creature. And they talk about the similarities that we have with chimpanzees. And at one time, they talked about a 2% difference between the DNA between us and chimpanzees. Now, even though that would be 2%, you've got to understand that would be 60 million letters of code that would be different in just 2%. And now, scientists now understand there's about a 5% difference between us and chimpanzees, which would equal 150 million nucleotide letters being different, all right? That's a huge, huge difference. You'd be reading a very different story if you had a book that had millions and millions of letters different, wouldn't you? And by the way, we share half of our DNA with bananas. And does that make us half banana? All right, what we're talking about is common designer. And you should be thankful that DNA and bananas is very similar to. I had a banana when I had breakfast this morning, and it was very delicious. And isn't it good that some of the building blocks that are in the banana are similar to what we have? Because without it, if the food systems and everything weren't compatible with us, we'd be in a mess because God created it that way. Are you guys with me? Okay. So basically, like I said, God created the plants and the animals, and in their DNA, God created differences. There's variations within those different kinds, different animals, different plants, and God created people differently, and that's where we're going to talk about where the races come from. It was not like this. It was not like this. We were created in the image of God. By the way, notice that the skin color changes as it goes up. Interesting the way the artist did that. Almost all of them are like that. All right? So, now that we have a taste of what natural selection and genetics is about, let's get back to the idea of races. So let me ask you this question. How many skin colors are there? Or, okay, let's say if I stole your wife's purse and you called the police, call police here? Call the police, and you said you would describe me as being what? What would you say? Say I was white? Am I white? No, and the reason is because there's a pigment in my skin. It starts with the letter M. What is it? Melanin. All right? Everybody in this room has the pigment melanin. And virtually everybody on the planet has melanin. There's one exception, that's people that have a mutation called albinism or albinos. But other than that, everybody has melanin. Some people have more, some people have less. All right? And just like in this room right now, there's a dark blue shirt over here, or light blue shirt over here, and then there's got to be a dark blue shirt somewhere. It's the same color blue, just less pigment in the lighter blue and more pigment in the darker blue. You with me? Okay. So based on that, how many skin colors are there? One. Just different shades. It's a little bit more complex than that, and we could cover that in the question and answer, but nonetheless. So think of it like this. Remember we talked about genetics, okay? Let's say that Adam and Eve, all right, had medium skin, all right, and that the capital letter A and B stood for lots of melanin, and the small letter A and B stood for small amounts of melanin, okay? And remember how we talked about the dogs? You get half your DNA. Can you see how Adam and Eve were having different kinds of children? I think it was pretty exciting. Like, look at the color. Oh, look at that one. Hey, they were all different. It was pretty cool because God built a lot of genetic diversity into them. But obviously, this guy didn't think that was the case. In fact, here, take a look at these twins, all right? They have the same skin color. I want you to think about that. They have the same skin color, different shades. And they just got cuter as time went by, right? And this happens all the time. In fact, you probably see that happen around where you're at. Cheryl and Karen are twin sisters, okay? So, how many races? According to the Bible. If you use a biblical definition of races, all right, there's actually only one race. It's called the human race, descended from Adam and Eve, created in the image of God. In fact, there's very little that is different between what we call a race. In fact, this is a scientist said that race is a social construct, not biological, derived mainly from perceptions conditioned by the events of recorded, that's a type of recorded history, and it has no basis in biological reality. Okay, let me give you an example of what we show in difference of races. What's the difference between the shape of an eye of a European versus an Asian? What's the difference? Is there a difference in their eyes? Actually, no, there isn't. They're both the same eyes. Okay? It's the same eyes. What's different is on the outside. It's in the skin. Both our eyes are the same, but there's a little fat layer. Unfortunately, some Asian women, thinking that they want to look like European women, have a plastic surgery where they actually cut open the eye and remove some of that fat so that their eyelid comes up higher, because they think somehow that, magazines have taught them that it's more beautiful to have open eyes. But their eyes are the same. Are you guys with me? How about this woman? What do you see that's different about this lady? Okay, is she black? Now, I want you to think. Is she black? No, if I took a piece of black paper and held it up to her face, she would be a very dark brown, okay? And that would be the case. I mean, she's got some pretty white teeth there. She's smoking a pipe. But did you notice something else about her? Her eyes are Asian in like, okay? But sometimes we don't see that, because you might say we're kind of colorblind in a way, because we see somebody's outward appearance and their skin color. In fact, I even mentioned to you that literally the difference between races, the physical constructs, is literally skin deep. It has to do with the color of the skin and how fat is distributed throughout the face and throughout the body. That's the only difference. In fact, the difference between races is 1% of 1% of the genome. It's this little. We're kind of all the same. And yet evolutionists tells us other ideas that give us some racist ideas. And in fact, like I said, Darwin said that because of dark skin that they were less evolved, and that has some pretty big consequences in the future. And the whole idea of evolution basically is saying that our ancestors that we evolved from were somehow inferior. For example, you've heard of Neanderthal, right? And the ideas persisted that they were these big brutes and all that. But guess what? We found out since that time that they actually buried their dead. They played music. They wore makeup, okay? And we know that geneticists have found out, because we've been able to extract some Neanderthal DNA and found out that they are fully and 100% human, and secular scientists no longer consider them to be something other than Homo sapien. So their science of the day of the past was wrong. And does that bring into question we should trust the science of today if it's been wrong in the past? Of course, we have Hesperornithopithecus, which is Nebraska man. And you look at the images, they showed him as this brute and everything, but it came from just one tooth fragment. They came up with this portrait. And later on, they found it was the tooth of an extinct pig. They believed it to be science back in the day. All right? Do we trust their science today? Of course, Australopithecine. They show them walking upright, but yet the evidence shows that the place where the spine entered the head, the curved bones, that they were tree climbers and tree walkers. They might have been able to walk upright for a little while, just like apes do today, but they were mostly knuckle walkers, and that's what the evidence shows us. She's an extinct ape-like creature, not human, nor an evolutionary branch of humans. That's what they used to believe, but can we trust their science today? And there's other things where this one piece of shin bone, they described this creature to have deep-set eyes, face covered with hair, brute, ate elephant, and was tall and robust. And all they had was a fragment of a shin bone to come up with that design. Can we trust their science? Piltdown man is one of the unfortunate frauds. exposed as a manipulated fraud, but it was accepted as science for about 50 years and was major in the Scopes trial, if you guys are familiar with the Scopes trial of the 1920s. The science was wrong, and scientists believe it. Can we trust their science now? And this idea of evolution and impacting races has had some incredible impacts on our culture. Evolutionary beliefs led to Hitler, Stalin, and Pol Pot, all having in common the belief that evolution was true. And they were rampant Darwinists, and they were being consistent with their worldview, that some humans are nothing special and no more than highly evolved animals and must be exterminated. And the amount of people that have been brought to death because of an evolutionary idea pales into consideration to anything else that's ever happened in history. All right, so let's go back. What does the Bible have to say about races and about people groups? Well, the Bible does tell us about something, the Tower of Babel. That basically the people were disobeying God in his command that they were to spread throughout the earth and populate. They were all in one place. They had one language. They had geographical barriers, and they were passing on their traits to each other. You remember the DNA. But at the Tower of Babel, something else happened. And that is that God broke down those language barriers, okay? And they separated, and those physical characteristics were passed on to different people groups, okay? The conclusion, though, is that there is one race, and it's called the human race. It's not only a biological fact, but it's a biblical fact. That we were all created in the image of God, every one of us. God sent his son Jesus to die for all of us. And the Bible does not support the idea of races or the inferiority thereof. He made one man of every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. So in summary, natural selection is change, but it's not evolution. There are variations within kind, but once again, the Bible is proven to be true, that man is made in the image of God, as opposed to what most people hear over and over and over again. They keep saying, hey, it's everywhere. Obviously, evolution is true. It's got to be true. And they hear it no matter where they go, TV, magazines, textbooks, everywhere they go. But we need to fight back. We need to tell the truth from a biblical perspective and use the resources that we have before us in order to do that. And again, you can find those answers at our website, which is, I'm not going to let you forget it. All right, so there you go.